Hi, good evening. I'm Nora Razian. I'm head of exhibitions and programs at the Sursock Museum in Beirut, and it's my first time in Artissima, so thank you for inviting me. We're really happy to be here. And I'm here together with Mr. Abraham Karabajakian, who can introduce himself.
Yeah, so now you know my name. It's Abraham Karabajakian, and I like art. I think that's why I'm here. And again, I wanted to thank Artissima because it made me discover today the city that I really loved. Many cultural things that I discovered, and I thank them for that. I hope that you'll enjoy the talk, discovering new artists that I also discovered. I'm not a lot into contemporary art, but going to fairs to more and more know about what's happening around. Thank you.
So we're going to go see 3 artists today and visit 3 gallery booths. So our theme is architecture, memory, and the built environment. So the artists we're going to be looking at are concerned with how social, political, and historical narratives sort of get concretized within the built environment. So we'll be starting at the SFEIR-SEMLER gallery, so follow us. So we're going to start in this gallery of SFEIR-SEMLER. It's one of the most exciting galleries in Beirut. And we're going to start looking at the work of Marwan Rashmawi. He's one of the post-war artists of Beirut, but he's one of the rare artists of his generation who doesn't work with photography and film, but rather with kind of space and form to talk about the contemporary history of Beirut. So he started working in the 90s, and he was really concerned with kind of the changing urban fabric of the city and the kind of receding public space that happened after the war and in the ensuing kind of development of the city. So his earlier works really dealt with the kind of history of the city through its architecture. These 2 works are part of a series that he's been working on recently, and he showed them at the Istanbul Biennial, among other places. And these works are very sort of emblematic of the city of Beirut. So if you've ever been there, they kind of evoke the city for you immediately. And these are based on kind of unfinished constructions around the city of Beirut. And Marwan, he kind of taught himself how to work with materials. So his studio is in an industrial part of town. And he sort of taught himself how to manipulate stone, concrete, sort of make casts. And so he kind of works with the material that he finds around this neighborhood that he lives in. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, actually, today while we were visiting the Castello de Rivoli, I remembered Marwan's work because I saw that the castle was unfinished because of budget limitation, and it reminds me of all these series done in Beirut, both on unfinished buildings and then on ruins of the war. And in Lebanon, we are, all of us, all the population, are transformers of negativism into positive. So I see in these works embellishing unfinished buildings and maybe ruins of war and insisting on their existence by transforming them into art. And I love that, and it's one of the advantages or the geniuses of the work of Marwan. I don't know if Nora has something else.
I mean, just thinking about the city of Beirut, it's such an important kind of actor in a lot of artists' practice at the moment, and it's got a kind of heavy presence. The built environment is it kind of tells the story of the space. So you have recent, brand new apartment blocks coming up, but you also have these kind of unfinished concrete spaces that are kind of also getting erased with the way the city is gentrifying and expanding. And I think Marwan is really interested in the kind of memory of a city and how it's contained within the materials itself, within the concrete, within the space. And for me, these are a way of kind of preserving that memory a little bit, but also they're almost like future ruins as well. So he's also made these kind of monuments to the city in a sense. Okay, we can move on to the next space. We're going to go to the Green Art Gallery, which is a gallery based in Dubai, a modern and contemporary art gallery. And in this booth, she's sharing with an Italian gallery. They're representing Nazgul Ansarinia, who's part of the kind of Back to the Future section. Okay. So Nazgul Ansarinya, she won the Abraj Prize in 2009, and she's sort of a prolific artist based in Tehran. And her work, we chose her work because it resonates also with Marwan's. In a sense, she's also dealing with the fabric of the city as it's undergoing changes. So we chose this work here. This work is called Membrane. And again, she's dealing with the city of Tehran. So after the revolution in 1979, there was a kind of a lot of construction. There was a construction boom. And again, more recently with the kind of lifting of the sanctions, etc. So she was interested in the kind of a certain memory and history of the city that was being lost with the gentrification, with the building boom. And this is something I think you see across the region in general, where sort of the idea of preserving architecture or memory only applies to, let's say, very sort of historical buildings, but sometimes not even then. So there's always the kind of memory of the city that's being erased. So here she's taken these kind of skins, or like, for me they look like skins, or they've been described as kind of death masks of buildings that have been sort of semi-torn down. And she takes a kind of 3D scan of the building and then creates a replica out of paper and glue. So it's like a paper mache. So again, it's this kind of daily material. So in a sense, it's kind of like this ghostly presence of these buildings that no longer exist, that speak of the kind of very private lives that existed within that. Do you want to add anything about?
No, I just wanted to link, I mean, the two artists here and just take a note on the sensuality of these works done by a lady artist versus the power of the strongness of Marwan's work. And we still see the memory, going back to the memories and the history and keeping them and embellishing them and showing them in a beautiful way in both works here, and so sensual. I mean, I liked a lot the texture of this work.
And just to briefly talk about this work here, pillars. So this again is speaking about a kind of new sort of middle and upper middle class that's come about in Iran, and the way they sort of appropriate a certain architecture to show newfound wealth. So there's a lot of columns that are used in building their houses. So she's kind of like riffing on that architecture, and she's talking about this kind of new middle class, new upper middle class in Iran post-revolution. So these are based on the kind of columns, Roman columns, that a lot of people used in the architecture of their houses, and within that it's kind of cracked open and it reveals a part of the Iranian constitution that deals with kind of budgetary and financial aspects. And again, this is made of cardboard and paper, so it's really interesting how she manipulates this material and sort of transforms it, but it still has this very kind of textural feeling to it.
So I wanted to know that, I mean we only hide either precious things or things that we don't want ashamed of. So what do you think it is?
This is the artist, so maybe.
Yes. I mean, for me, this
It's
wasn't
just the
so much
concept of a
about
pillar, yeah.
about hiding. It was about making or giving form to the text, or making the text create a form. So it wasn't so much about hiding the text, but it's actually more about revealing, so that you've made a cut, and then through the cut you can see what the form is made out of. The drawings also, I mean, one of them corresponds to this work, and each of these texts is actually an article from the Iranian constitution that deals directly with economy. It's about architecture and the new style of architecture that has become very popular in Tehran in the past 7-8 years. And this particular architecture, they've named it Roman Classic. And there's a direct relationship between the time where this style started to appear and the economic changes in the country, where the gap between the rich and poor got more, and because of the sanctions, a lot of money was stuck in the country, so it went into property and it went into building rather ostentatious architecture. I went back to the constitution, which is the base of how the economy is functioning. So there are about 11 articles in the constitution that speak about economy and about private and public property, and each of these pillars is made out of the text from one of the articles, and they're actually titled after the article. So this is Article 55, and the two other that you're seeing, I'm not sure. Maybe I think one is 47. The other one, I'm not sure which one. I will have to look at the title.
Thank
Yes.
you for the additional great information.
But yeah, we're going from Beirut to Tehran to Istanbul, so there's a whole historical, intermingling and interrelationship there, politically and culturally and socially. So we're going to look at the work of Michael Rakowitz at the RHONA HOFFMAN Gallery. It's a Chicago-based gallery, and Michael is based in Chicago. And we're going to see some of the work that he presented at the last Istanbul Biennial, which was in 2015. This is part of a bigger installation that Michael presented at the last Istanbul Biennial, which was drafted by Caroline Bakachev. And it's called The Bone is Ours, the Flesh is Yours, which is a saying in Turkish when a kind of apprentice is given over to his teacher, which means, the structure is ours, but you can mold him as you want. And here, Michael was interested. He was commissioned to do this on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and he was really interested, and he is always interested in how to read history sort of tangentially through material objects, through kind of personal stories, and here through the kind of architecture of Istanbul. So a lot of the kind of moldings in the Art Nouveau buildings around Istanbul were made by Armenian craftsmen, and you could sort of like read symbols like these kind of grape symbols here that were very typical of the kind of Armenian craftsmen that were working. And he was interested in how the kind of history of that population is still visible within the city of Istanbul. It was very much sort of kind of erased, but it's still sort of there in the presence of the buildings. So he was interested in kind of creating new moldings, featuring sort of like animal bones and other motifs that he was interested in, and relating it obviously to the history of Art Nouveau. He's from Chicago, and the two histories sort of shared a similar moment where they were both sort of rebuilt. I think it was at the end of the 19th century. So there was a lot of like new building going on, and a lot of these moldings were kind of shared between the two cities. So here you have frottage that was done, which he made in collaboration with architecture students in Istanbul from an Armenian high school, I think. And so they went around kind of capturing the skins of these buildings. So for me, this was interesting in relation to Nazgul's work that we just saw, and how she was sort of capturing the skin of a changing city. And here it's more of like capturing this like historical skin of the buildings. And he was also, he sort of, on the cabinet there, he's sort of written these different moments that he's intertwining within the history of the city and the history of architecture in the city. One of them talks about a large population of dogs that was kind of exiled from Istanbul to an island, and he sort of relates that to the kind of history of the Armenian genocide there. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, I think what I liked in the work here that I saw also in Istanbul Biennale is that how an artist can, with walls and drawings, bring back the memory of people that existed and did these walls and build some of these buildings. And it was very interesting to look at all these proofs of their history. It's very touching to see that as an Armenian, and I think that what today is done by many injustices are done in the world, and hopefully I don't want to go into the political issue of it, but it touched me a lot to see the history of these people through the walls and through the buildings and through these drawings.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you. And just to end this with, maybe it's a tough subject to go to the history, but it's so beautiful, and let's continue with the positive way towards all the people in the region, because we come from a region where things are happening, and hopefully they will be really changing very soon.